And we're live. I'm Mike Mackay, and here I am today with Dr. Randy Overbeck, who's an award-winning educator, author, and speaker. Hello, Randy.
Hey, good morning in Australia.
Yeah, well, here we are on opposite sides of the clock. That's 7:30 a.m. here and 7:30 p.m. there in Ohio, and you're in a little town with the odd name of Lebanon, which like right. The name of a country in a state in America. Join those dots.
America for you.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about Lebanon just now. I had to write down some stuff about you because there's so much. Okay. So you've been an educator for 3 decades, and you've turned the experience into captivating fiction, authoring a series, the Haunted Shore series. You've won 9 national awards, and what's coming out shortly is your new book, which is going to be another series, which we'll talk about a little later. And you also have a podcast you run, great stories about great storytellers. And you must send me the link later on that one. I want to hear about that one. And you also do a lot of public speaking. And you have a multimedia presentation and things that still go bump in the night, a few favorite haunts, everything you want to know about publishing with audiences all over the US. You're a member of the Mystery Writers of America. You're an active member of the literary community, contributing to writers' critique groups. You serve as a mentor to emerging writers, and you participate in writing conferences such as Sleuth Fest, Killer Nashville, and the Midwest Writers Workshop. Okay, but one of the things you told me early on was that you were involved in gang violence. Hang on, that didn't come out too well. That made it sound like you were a member of a gang. So can you tell the story as you earlier related it to me a couple of days ago?
Yes. Part of my primary responsibilities as a school leader was serving as what's called in America the assistant superintendent, which means I'm generally second in charge. And part of that responsibility, part of that job was to be part of the leadership team that dealt with any issues that came to the school. My primary focus was on curriculum, but I was also had to deal with student issues. And in the last district that I was at, which is another small town close by called Xenia, that's Xenia. It's a very, very interesting town with a very huge mix of everything from very wealthy communities to very poor communities. And we, on more than one occasion in my 16 years that I was there, we had to deal with some gang issues. It is not what people normally think of in terms of gang violence, as you mentioned, but it was often issues that about fighting that could erupt into other problems. And our job as school leaders was to contain it or extinguish it, depending upon what the situation was and what we could do. One of the problems, here's an example. So in America, teenagers are not allowed to look like gang members in schools, but kids are very creative. So they would find a way to wear what's called gang colors. So Gang A would have the colors of red and yellow. Gang 2 would have the colors of blue and green. And depending on what color you were wearing, that would tell the kids, and then eventually the adults caught on, kind of where your sympathies lie. And our job was try to find a way to navigate that without infringing on kids' rights, but making sure that those kind of conflicts didn't enter into the school and into the classroom and into the cafeteria. And we generally did a pretty good job.
Did you have those things like we've seen where the kids had to go through like metal detectors?
We did not. Now, my tenure is finished. I've retired a few years ago, but we did not have to go that far. We did have a few situations where we had to deal with kids who either had brought guns to school or had guns in the car that they were going to try to bring guns to school. Fortunately, none of that ever came to a head. What the reality is this, that in most cases, in almost all cases, kids talk more than they do stuff. So the fact that a student had a gun in his trunk would be bragging to some other student who then would tell some other student, and then eventually that would get to either a teacher or an administrator or both. And we would be able to diffuse the situation before anything negative happened. There were always, the district served 5,000 kids, and the 5,000 kids come from all kinds of communities and neighborhoods. So there was always some conflicts boiling underneath the surface. We did a pretty good job, I think, of managing it and keeping most kids on the straight and narrow. It wasn't always easy, and I was not the number one person in charge of that, but I was always part of the team that had to figure out how do we find out if this is true? How do we make sure that the kids, if this is true, how do we make sure they don't bring the gun in school? How do we track the kid down that's supposed to have a gun? Those kinds of things.
So, you taught it that, I'll use our vernacular. I live in Perth in Western Australia, but you taught in high school and you also taught in college, what we call a university.
Right, that is correct. Which is now university. It's called that here now too. So my career began teaching high school, and I did that for 8 years. And then from there, I taught in college for 4 years. And then after that is when I made the jump to school leadership and served as an assistant superintendent or superintendent in 4 different districts, generally in the Ohio, in the south part, in the Midwest part of the country.
Okay, all right. But so when did you start writing? Did this lead you to writing? Or were you writing while you were still an educator?
Yes, but not that kind of writing. So the long answer is this. When I was a teenager, I had dreams of being in the next great American novelist. I wrote some, what we would call novellas now, and short stories and that kind of stuff. And I did toy with the possibility of thinking, I think I might be okay at this writing thing. I think I'd like to give it a shot. But right about that time, about the end of my high school career, the beginning of my college career, the pull to serve children as an educator kind of came, and that pretty much overwhelmed that, and the fact that I had to find a way to, I was getting married and was going to have kids, so I had to take care of a family. And for almost 40 years, I was pretty satisfied and pretty complete with doing the responsibilities I did as an educator. But one of the things that helped me was throughout all that time, at least mostly the last 20 some years, if you're an administrator, about 30% of my time and 30% of my responsibilities all had to do with writing. So I wrote everything you can think of. I wrote board policy. I wrote agendas. I wrote memos. I wrote newsletters. I wrote articles for the newspaper. So the writing juices were always flowing. They weren't doing the kind of fiction writing that came later. And then in the last decade or so of my career, a little more than that, I guess, I earned my PhD, and to do that, you have to write a dissertation that's 100-page plus research document. So all of that kept the writing juices flowing. And it was, as I was finishing the dissertation, is when I kind of started to get the writing bug and started to pick up my habit of doing some creative writing again. And the rest, as they say, is history. But most of the writing that has been published was done right near the end of my career or after I retired, because I had the time to do it.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, Randy, is that so they're all different styles of writing you were doing? In my own business career, I've had to do a lot of that. And also I have a master's degree in computer science, and you say writing a dissertation is, they explain to you this how you want it written, you go, that sounds kind of daft, but all right. Okay. It is what it is. But when you wanted to become the next great American novelist, who are you following? Who are your heroes? Who did you follow?
When I was a teenager, I read. I was mainly a classic follower. So I was a big follower of Edgar Allan Poe. I was reading Sherlock Holmes. I was, the first great American novelist that I read as a teenager that really got in was Herman Wouk. He wrote a historical series called, well, I don't know what the first book was called, The Winds of War, and it was an incredible tome on the buildup and the Second World War, which just blew me away. I was just overwhelmed, and I thought, it would be great to be able to write like that. But to be honest, I at least I was honest enough with myself to know that early on I didn't have those skills. It took a long time of a lot of other writing to be able to recognize, and a lot of reading. I was doing a lot of reading to decide. I think I can try this kind of thing.
Well, one of the American authors that I've always liked, particularly, you always get so that when you write, you must firstly write about what you know.
Right.
What you know about, and secondly, you must show, not tell. So that American novelist Faulkner, I enjoy the books like The Grapes of Wrath and that. I mean, he lived it. He was there on the ground, and when you read it, I mean, it comes through.
It does. You're right. And I remember liking Steinbeck a lot. I was a big Mark Twain fan. I really. Mark Twain's ability to turn a phrase from when I was as a high schooler studying it to a teacher teaching it. It just amazed me, his ability to be able to do that. He said one time, somebody asked him how long it takes him to write. He said he could write 30 pages in 2 days, or he could write 2 pages in 30 days. He said, depends on the quality of what you wanted.
Yeah. I remember one of the great Irish novelists, what was it? James Joyce. Yeah. Somebody asked him, because we get told you got to write 1,000 words a day, 2,000 words a day, and everybody's got a metric. And they asked him, they said, so how many words did you write today? He said, I wrote 8 words. Now, what? And he said, but they are all very good words. Words like that. I think you should write a bit more than that each day, but that's what he said.
Well, and I think one of the things that in my life that made me take the jump to go ahead and try to put a book together, believe it or not, was the dissertation. So to be able to finish the PhD program and research and write a dissertation was a daunting task. And I thought, if I can do that, well, then I can certainly put a plot together, put something that holds together and works for a novel. And then
I think I can resonate with that. I'm thinking back to the M degrees that have to do the same. You got to do. I mean, you say something, you got to have a whole bunch of references to back it up.
Right.
To do that, and even the references have references. So it gets deeper into. So when you write, if I write about your town, Lebanon, in Ohio, I would need to know how many people are in Lebanon. Okay. And like for instance, a lot of my stories happen in pubs. Have you got any famous pubs in Lebanon, for instance?
Lebanon has the Golden Lamb was at different places, which is the famous inn and tavern here in Lebanon, was very famous as a pub during certain periods of time. Other periods of history it was dry, so it's kind of. But yes, short answer is yes.
But then you'd have to research that a lot. So if you had an incident in there, you'd have to do all the research. Oh. So what do you think was behind all this that actually made you want to write?
Well, I think I am a storyteller at heart. But my children and grandchildren would if they could run in here and they would say, "Oh, Papa's always got a story about this or that." So I think that's part of it, and part of it is my intent to put something that educates people. So even though all of my novels, 5 of which are now published, are all good reads, according to the reviewers and according to the readers, they're engaging reads. each of them carry a message or a theme or a social issue that I am trying to help share.
So would you see yourself as an educator who is putting those thoughts and experience into novels? Or were
Yes.
you always a novelist who, through circumstance, was an educator for 30 plus years?
Well,
Which way?
I hope by now I'm a novelist, but my first and foremost experience is as an educator. So when I've talked about this before, I actually use a quote from another really great mystery writer, a gal by the name of S.J. Roseanne, and
Okay.
I was at a conference with her, and she shared this, and I have remembered it all the time. She said, "Nonfiction is about reality. Fiction is about truth." So what I try to do is, in my fiction, capture an important truth that could make a difference with people, that could resonate with people.
But now tell me, so based upon that, you've written and published 3 books. We're going to get to your 4th one a little later, which part of a series, Haunted Shores. There was Blood on the Chesapeake, then Crimson at Camp May, and then Scarlet at Crystal River.
Right.
Let's go through them. Blood on the Chesapeake. Have you got it there?
Yep, right here.
There it is, Blood on the Chesapeake. Then Crimson at Camp May. You're going to run out of hands here. And Scarlet at Crystal River. There we go. So now just tell us about each of these, and just back to what you were talking about earlier about themes and a message and all that. Let's start with Blood on the Chesapeake, your very first one.
Well, Blood on the Chesapeake is set in a part of the United States it's called the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, and this lies in the area just south of the nation's capital. So, nation's capital, Washington D.C. This is an area south, a very rural, kind of rustic area, but there's a great deal of shipbuilding and stuff. And the story behind this is my wife and I had traveled to this area many times. I didn't know that at the time, but I was in the process of collecting research for this book. And we really, really like this area. It's one of the most beautiful places in the United States. But it has a dark history. So it sided with the South during the Civil War. There are still a lot of Confederate sympathizers in the area and stuff. So there's kind of this push me, pull me kind of double personality that the community has. So I decided I wanted to tell a story. This book is actually set. The story takes place in 1998. So the book was published in a few years ago, but it was the story is 20 years happens 20 years earlier than that. And in the story, our protagonist, who's a Midwesterner like myself from this part of the country, moves there to take a new job. And when he moves there, he finds out that he ends up encountering this racial prejudice that's floating just below the surface in the school, in the community, in different places. The paranormal part comes in because he gets this really tiny little athletic office as part of his coaching responsibilities. And he finds out the office is haunted by a teenager who had been lynched some 30 some years earlier.
But can I just stop you there? When you said that in the story is that it dwells upon what was actually going on underneath, if I can call it that.
Right.
Now, does that harken back to your educational experience as an educator? I think you touched on it earlier, Randy, when you're trying to figure out and saying, well, what's actually going on? They're all dressed. I think you told me earlier that they're not allowed to wear their colors, but they're the yellow gang, so they all wear yellow socks. Okay. Right. And you got to figure, so what's underneath? Is that what sort of made you?
What I meant by that is that in 1998, when this story is taking place, racism in most of its evidence is not overt. So there is not segregation. There is not housing discrimination on the surface. But this area still today, some 20 years later, still has a lot of undercurrents of racism, of treating African Americans in a different way than someone who's white. And I made this story a little more poignant because in the story, we learn that the victim, the young man who was killed, was having an affair as a black young man with a white girl, which in the 60s was an absolute no-no.
Yeah.
And that's why he ends up being lynched. So the story, the mystery is, well, who is this young man? What happened to him? And how does Daryl, our protagonist, figure out a way to bring justice to him? The message underneath that is Daryl is dealing with this racial injustice that we, the United States, as a country, are still struggling with in 2023. That's the connection. That's the connection between the storytelling and the education.
And the next one, Crimson at Camp May.
Crimson at Cape May is my wife and I went to Cape May, and I just fell in love with this town. It's a very interesting town. So I can't really do this justice on the screen here, but the town is located. It's a very old beach town. Now, I'm not sure what qualifies as an old beach town in Australia, but in America, people have been coming to this beach town for 150 years, but it's not really well known. We have a lot more famous beaches like Miami Beach and Malibu and Fort Lauderdale and Hilton Head, but this beach is one that's often overlooked. I love this town, and then one other thing about it is that the town is very photogenic. That was enabled me to capture really memorable scenes in this book. So I'm assuming your listeners or viewers would know what a Victorian architecture is.
Absolutely, yeah.
Beautifully painted, detailed houses. Well, this particular town has the largest collection of Victorian architecture in the United States in one place. So they have 170 Victorian bread and breakfasts and mansions in a town of about 5,000 people. So, and there's a very interesting story as to how that happened and how that occurred. That's all part of what I tell in the story. So there is this absolutely gingerbread kind of quality to this town. And when I did my research, I found out that not 20 miles, 25 miles from where this town sits is one of the largest nexus of human trafficking in the United States.
Really?
So human trafficking, I'm assuming it's the same in Australia, but human trafficking travels the same way all other shipment does. And in the United States, we call it the interstate highway system. Yeah. So they have one of the largest busiest interstate highway sections, about 25 miles from where this town is. So I wanted to use the contrast of this beautiful, idyllic setting and contrast that against this horrific crime that's going on some less than 30 miles away as a contrast to tell the story. So the murder that Daryl has to solve, which is a cold case murder about a bride that died on her wedding night some 5 years earlier, is tied to this larger crime of human trafficking, although Daryl doesn't know that when he gets involved. So it kind of gets sucked in and then.
So there's actually two crimes on the go.
There's actually two crimes, exactly.
Yeah, there's one, the apparent one, and then as he digs into it, he finds the underlying, or this other one, shall I say?
Right.
Okay, and the third one in this series, Scarlet at Crystal River.
Crystal River is a very interesting town. So I don't know what your viewers would know about this, but Florida is a place, a part of America that's getting a lot of development. Lots of people in the United States are moving to different parts of Florida, and lots of Florida is being highly developed. And I wanted to find some place in Florida that kind of captured the old Florida, kind of captured what it was looked like before. And I found this really cute town on what's called the Gulf Coast on the western side. Very small town, similar to in size to Cape May.
Where they have all the Art Deco sort of houses.
Yes, they have a lot of Art Deco houses, a lot of pastel colors. Yes, it has a really cute little beach, and it's famous for scallop diving, and it's famous for fishing, and it's got this great trail system. But what really enticed me was it's the only place in our country that you can swim with manatees. So
really?
It has a freshwater spring that the manatees escape from the ocean, or the Gulf, really, and during 2 months out of the year, 2.5 months out of the year, because of the warmer weather or warmer water, and they come and live in this freshwater spring that's in this town. And
really?
We
get here on the West Coast. So I'm on I'm in Western Australia, right? So we're like a third of the country landmass wise, and we've got a huge coastline, and we get them here as well. But they're, from my recollection, they're all saltwater here.
The manatees live in saltwater 10 months out of the year. I don't know how their systems allow them to move from saltwater. The Gulf, the Florida Gulf, the Gulf of Florida is where they spend most of their life, and that's saltwater. But they swim into this freshwater spring, that not a very big spring. I mean, I don't know, a couple acres maybe. And when we were there, when I was doing research for the book, there might have been 75 of these huge mammals swimming in this.
Really?
Yep. And you could, and they're protected in America. You know, you're not allowed to hunt them or anything else. And this was the only place you could swim with manatees. So I try to capture some really unique experiences in the town, as well as telling a good mystery story. So
did you get to dive with the manatees?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
But what, with scuba or snorkel? Or
it's snorkel.
Okay.
Snorkel. And you don't all you really do is float, and you're not allowed to touch them, but they will actually come and touch you. So you kind of have to keep your hands off them, but they'll come and bump you and rub alongside of you. It's a
Oh, well, you're very blessed to do that. We have my wife and I have done that with whale sharks. You know, the same rules apply. You're not allowed to touch, and you've got to be a certain way back behind the eyes. But then they'll take a deep dive, and they vanish, and then they come up. You got to keep saying to yourself, "He eats plankton. He eats plankton. He eats plankton. I hope he eats plankton." Because they're like. These ones were like 19 feet long, and they're babies, you know.
Wow.
No,
19 feet long. Whoa, Jesus.
Yeah, but we didn't. You can get them here, but we were in the Seychelles, and we went there and dove with them. But now manatees are on our bucket list, because you mentioned like the book about that little town that everybody does like. It sounds like where we live. We live like about an hour south of Perth. In an area, you know, which everybody says, no, that's the wrong end of town. But we live in this, we now live in this 1968 built beach bungalow on the beach, you know, so they all say it's a dreadful place to live. I say it's good. You're quite right. Don't come, tell your friends. Anyway.
This town is kind of stuck between not wanting to have too much development, but wanting to stay alive. So that, you know, that's part of it. And it's a town that is not well known in our country. So which was part of what I try to find a place that's not really well known that I can bring some recognition to through the book. So that's the history behind it. Then here's the mystery behind it. So again, what I was trying to do is I was trying to do another contrast between this beautiful seaside, waterside place. That's a neat place to live. And about an hour east, an hour inland, is one of the biggest farming areas in Florida. They run huge, massive fruit farms in the central part of Florida. And my story is about, again, ghosts, but it's two immigrant children who had been murdered. Two children of migrant families that had been murdered, that Daryl has to figure out again who these kids are. He has no idea who these kids are. Find out who they are, find out where they came from, find out what happened to them, and then eventually try to bring the people to justice that had
But
done
you must,
unspeakable.
from your educational, educational work, you must have a lot of knowledge, probably knowledge you're not even aware of about all these ethnic communities that you've worked with. I mean, you must have had a lot of them in the different schools you worked in.
Well, we in the last school district that I worked in Xenia, we had a very strong African American community. We had a very sizable Appalachian, what's called an Appalachian, which is called a poor white community. We had a growing Hispanic community, but not a large one. And then we had some spatterings of other immigrants, some from Asia, and some from Eastern Europe. But again, just not sizable, but enough that we had to. One of my responsibilities was I was in charge of what we call in our country ESL. That's English as a second language. So we had people hired whose job is to help kids transition. Okay, I only speak Romanian, so she had to help them be able to cope with being in America, trying to be able to speak English. And we had teachers who did that, and I was her boss, so that was part of how I learned about some of those.
Okay, no, well, I think you got to, as I say, write about what you know. So let's get on to your latest book. It's a new series.
It is intended to be. Yes, it is the first in a new series. It is a departure. I'm trying to do something different. It's not a paranormal mystery like the first three are. I will say before we leave that I'm working on this winter, my winter, your summer. I'll be working on the 4th edition in the Haunted Shore Mysteries, but that's for 2025. It takes me a long time to put the book together and for me to be satisfied that it's ready for readers. So we're probably looking at sometime in late 24 or early 25 for that book.
Okay.
But this book is the first in the series of what I'm planning right now. Maybe it's probably 3 books. It's called the series is called Lessons in Peril. Like the first series, it's rooted in school. So the story starts at least with a teacher, and in this case, an administrator, and is about what's happening in schools. Now, in my Haunted Shore Mystery series, the hero is a high school history teacher, and there are always elements of school in the story, but the story doesn't take place largely in school. School is kind of like the background setting for the story to take place. In this book, almost everything takes place in school. So I'm trying something very different here. This is an atmospheric amateur sleuth mystery. So in this book, I have again set in the 90s. I like that decade for different reasons, but I'll talk about what for this book in a minute. But in the 90s, a rogue hallucinogen drug gets developed called a wolf's head tattoo that does some of the things that LSD does, but worse. Kids get a hold of this and they can simply take, and they don't even have to ingest it. They just, like a paper tattoo on their arm, and it floods their blood system. And then it causes all kind of hallucinations and all kind of trips. And in this story, I have a bunch of young kids, 5th graders, 12, 13, 14-year-old, 13, 11, 12, and 13-year-old kids get a hold of this, steal a car, crash the car, and die. So that this little small town that this takes place in is, and all these 4 kids all die in one time. Well, that's never happened in this small town. So the town is so upset that they want the school district to do something and find out who's bringing the drugs in. So my character, an assistant superintendent by the name of Ken Parks, is given the responsibility to work with the cops to find out who's pushing drugs into the schools. Everything in this book, everybody in this book are all school people. All the good guys and all the bad guys are all school people. We're talking janitors and janitors and secretaries and teachers and board members and superintendents. And part of the fun for the reader is trying to figure out, well, is this a good guy or a bad guy? Is he in on making money from the drugs, or is he trying, or she trying to protect kids?
So in your time as an educator, did you find that there were good people and bad people and some really evil people, as I like to call them?
Well, yeah, the answer is, of course, yes. I mean, in my experience, I got to be real honest with you, Mike. In my 39 years as an educator, I worked with thousands of people, probably more than 10,000 people in all the different schools. The vast majority of them, 98% of them, are in it for the kids. They're in it because they're not in it for the money, because they could almost always make more money doing something else. They're in it to try to provide a better life for the kids, or to help because they love French, or because they want kids to know about history, or along those lines. But
they've got a passion for the job.
Right. But like every other profession, we always have some bad apples, always. I can tell you stories of custodians who tried to poison another custodian. I mean, so there are definitely reality things that, just like every other area that would have bad people, so did we. And I decided that I would just use some of the characters that I had encountered, tweak their evilness, as you mentioned, and create what I believe was a believable bad guy, believable villain for in my story, or villains for in my story.
So what made you do the shift from having the school system as a backdrop, as opposed to now immersing the characters into the school? What made that shift?
Well, in the case of the trilogies, in the case of these, the story starts with a school experience. So in the first one, Daryl learns about this rumor about the kid that was lynched from his other students, who are giving him a hard time, saying he doesn't know the real story about it. Okay. In Cape May, he's actually coaching a summer football camp because he lost his job because of what he ended up bringing people to justice. So they all start with some aspect of school. And then because of the nature of the crime, I wanted to move it away from school. This one felt like it was the perfect thing to set within the school. First of all, these things really happen. This drug is imaginary. The story's fictional. But the idea about some people in the system seeing children as possible customers and victimizing those kids by selling drugs to them, that happens, I would imagine, in most school systems, but certainly.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So I thought that was a credible concept to be able to tell the story about that. Plus, part of it is I've always been a big teacher advocate. I have an earlier program that I did called Teachers Are the Real American Heroes, to talk about how teachers really save, both literally and figuratively, kids' lives. But I'm also realistic that every teacher is not a great teacher. Every teacher is not even a good guy. Every administrator is not even a good guy. Sometimes they're only in it because of their power or their thirst for power or something. I mean, those things all happen, and I'm a realist about that. So I thought and in this book, I've got really good people and some pretty nasty people. So, all of whom claim to be educators. So that's part of the backdrop of the book.
So, in your experience, there was drugs still a big problem? I guess it is in the schools.
I don't know that I would say the short answer is yes. The drugs were a big problem in schools. They're a worse problem now. Meaning, I've been out 10 years, so they're a worse problem now than they were 10 years ago. But that's simply a factor of society. The drug problem is worse today in society than it was 10 years ago. You know, we've had horrible times with the opioids here in America.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that factor that flows into the schools just like it does every other part of society. In our district, did we have drug problems? Yes. Was it terrible? No. It was sporadic. I mean, I can tell you, I know of a couple kids that took drugs and ended up committing suicide or died as a result. I mean, so the problems were real, but in a group of 5,000, they weren't widespread.
Yeah.
But if one kid dies, that's too much. So it's not like, well, you only lost 3 kids. That's not terrible. It still is terrible.
They're still here in Western Australia in the schools and adults. There's still a drug problem here.
Right.
And of course, we have all the gangs here. We have all the motorcycle gangs, the outlaw gangs, Angels, Comancheros, Banditos.
Okay. No.
And they have some very good distribution networks, So anyway, there.
Yeah.
That's where it goes. But tell me, so when do you actually get to write all this? Are you an early birder or are you an owl when it comes to writing?
I'm not an early bird. I'm. If this was reversed and I was 7:30 in the morning and you were 7:30 at night, you'd probably see bags right here, most likely.
Yeah.
I was an early bird. I mean, my wife and I talk about for 23 years, which is when she was working. We were up every day at 5:30 in the morning, but that is not my natural time at all. So I have, everybody says, well, I have this system because of my life and the way things are right now. I don't really have that. So my wife is handicapped. So that means that I have certain kind of responsibilities and time stuff that I wouldn't. My goal is that once I'm on a run, I try to do about 2 to 3 hours a day that I'm actually able to write. Most of the time that will be in the later morning, most days. But there are days when the best time for me to write, because of doctor's appointments and what else, is 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I do have one thing that I'm very fortunate about. I can write anywhere. So I've created I did part of this story sitting in the doctor's office waiting for my wife to finish PT. You set me down, you give me 20 minutes, I'll generate half a page or something, or a page and a half. So I'm really, what it is, it's a factor of what my job was. One of the characteristics of the job that I had was you never had more than 15 minutes to yourself. There are always demands. Okay, next one comes in, you got to do this, you got to do this. So I learned to be able to adapt and use whatever time I could to take care of this one thing. So that I've been able to carry that over to my writing. So whenever you give me 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour, I'll be at the computer and I'll get the next chapter out.
Yeah. So the latest book's out and about. It's being launched.
The latest book was actually just released by the publisher last week. So it's out. What is today? Wednesday. In fact, it was out 1 week ago today. It was the 11th of October was the launch date.
And the theme and the next one, are you able to tell us a bit about the next book? Or
well, I can give you at least a little bit of an idea. So what I'm trying to do with this series is something very different than I did with the first series. So the first series is a series of paranormal mysteries, of ghost story, of cold case murder mysteries with ghost stories.
Okay.
This series is going to involve the same characters, because the characters, even this early, I'm getting really good response on how credible and how the characters are resonating. Right. A very different story. So this is an amateur sleuth mystery. The second book that I have planned for this is actually going to be a thriller. It's not going to be an amateur sleuth mystery. It's going to involve the same characters. This book takes place in 95. The next book will take place probably a couple of years after that. And the next book will be about a school shooting. So I'm only putting the outline of what that story is going to be like together. But the same characters who deal with these problems, with the problems about the drug pusher in this book, will be the ones coming to grips with how first trying to prevent, and then how do you deal with the school shooting. So I think it has really good potential as a thriller. And in this country, which we have a tremendously terrible problem with with guns in general, but school shootings in particular. And those problems started in the late 90s. So
Okay.
we didn't have any problems with that, or I shouldn't say none. We had almost no problems with that prior to the early 90s, 97, 98, 99. The most famous first one actually happened in April of 1999.
Wow.
So it fits for my time frame for my heroes in terms of where they are in their life and what they're doing. And I think
we're all going to be looking forward to that. Our time is actually up, but it's been fascinating. 45 minutes has just rocketed past.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't realize it. Yeah.
Yeah, that really, we were flying there. You know, we just, anyway, Randy, again, thanks very much for your time. And we're all looking forward to the current book being released. And I'm looking forward to those next one and your podcast. Great stories about great storytellers as well.
Which you can get. You can get any place that you pick up podcasts, or you can also get all the episodes at my website, www.authorrandyoverbeck.com.
All right, Randy, again, thanks very much for your time. See you later.
I appreciate it. Bye.